Welcome to the Win, Make, Give podcast. This is Ben Kinney. Today, Chad Hyams and Bob Stewart interview Geoff Woods. Geoff is the vice president of Productive. You might recognize Geoff from the One Thing podcast, where he hosts some great conversations with some of the greatest minds in business and productivity. The One Thing is a book written by Jay Papasan and Gary Keller. One of the most impactful books in my career and two of the more impactful mentors in my life. Geoff dives in to how do you find the right mentor and how do you build that relationship? If you've ever wondered who should be leading you, who should be influencing you, or who your mentors are in all areas of your life, leadership, finance, health, wealth, relationships, this is the episode for you.
And here we are today with a friend of mine, a friend of the Win, Make, Give podcast that I'm so excited to have on this call, and that's Bob Stewart. Right, Bob, I'm so excited to have you here with me on this interview today. Would not want to do one of these without you.
Well, Geoff must be a good friend of yours because you would never elevate me onto a pedestal unless you're really kind of giving it a rib in one of your buddies.
Well, Geoff's always a good one to rib. He is a fantastic person. For those of you who know Geoff Woods, you know what I'm talking about. For those of you who don't know Geoff Woods, by the end of this episode, I think you're going to feel like you've got a friend in Geoff Woods. So, Geoff, welcome to the Win, Make, Give podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor.
Geoff, you know, I could give your list. I could give your history. I like to let our guests tell everybody what it is they want to say about themselves. So, Geoff, for those who don't know Geoff Woods, would you introduce yourself to the Win, Make, Give world?
Sure. So I am a family man with a business, not a businessman with a family. I'm somebody who wakes up every single day asking the question, how do I be a model of what it looks like to have a thriving marriage, to raise wonderful kids who can go on to make a massive impact in the world?
Wow. Love it. I mean, that definitely not the introduction I would have given because of how I know you and all that. Yet I know you're a family man. I know how important your family is to you. Yet, Geoff, let's now give everybody the business side of you because you've done quite a bit and you've done it with some pretty powerful tools behind you.
Sure. So I'm the co-founder and president of Productive, which is the company behind the best-selling book, The One Thing. So my two partners are the co-authors of the book, Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. And when the book had taken off and become one of the highest rated business books of all time, they realized there was a company there. The challenge was Gary's one thing is Keller Williams. Jay's one thing is running education for KW. And they needed somebody whose one thing was the one thing. And for the last 5 years, I have been going on a journey to figuring out how to help an individual, a team, or an entire organization better invest their time by having a relationship with their goals so they can achieve extraordinary results.
Wow. Okay. And Bob, you and I are really going to be tested today because Geoff, even before the One Thing stuff that you've been doing, you were very successful with a career before that.
Sure. So this is a crazy story. So prior to starting this company, I was in medical device sales, which was a great job. I ran through hospitals every day. I sold a device that actually saved lives. I would try to get my wife to call me McDreamy, and she got wonderful practice at saying no to me. And I think, Chad and Bob, I think a lot of the people who are listening to this have been in that place where even though things might be good professionally, something's missing. Yep. And that's where I was. I was lacking fulfillment, but I didn't have enough pain in my life to compel me to make a change.
So you were comfortable?
Oh, very. Are you kidding? Number one, scrubs. If you gain weight, you can't tell. It's elastic. That stuff is forgiving. And then
there's a hint for everybody out there listening. Start wearing scrubs more often.
Yeah. So 1, you get to wear scrubs. 2, I mean, it is a very healthy income. And 3, people call you a doctor and you don't have to correct them.
Awesome. So you were comfortable.
I was comfortable. And 2 things happened that changed that. First, a colleague of mine had a stroke. And I remember he was 35 at the time. That forced me to ask a different question. I asked, what would happen to my family if what happened to my colleague had happened to me? My wife and I had just bought a house in Orange County. We just had our first child, and my wife decided to become a stay-at-home mom. So the answer to that question was very unsettling. And the next week, my company needed to make a change to our commission structure. And overnight, I lost 40% of my income.
Wow.
You put those two things back to back, I now had a level of pain that forced me to ask bigger questions that would require that I search past the wall of, I don't know. And it was at that time I heard the Jim Rohn quote that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yeah.
I remember.
Powerful quote.
Yeah. I remember standing in my kitchen, looking down at my scrubs and asking, who are my 5? And I actually made the list.
Jeff, I was going to say, did you know who those 5 were? And
yeah,
like as you assessed those people, were you like, these are pretty decent people? Like, I mean, I'm assuming you weren't surrounding yourself with with a bunch of losers or something, right?
I call them friends of circumstance. They were friends that I had met through youth group or through school or through sports, and we had a connection. And when I looked at the list, Bob, I felt an amazing sense of gratitude. These are amazing people. They're still in my life today. The aha moment for me was that I was seeking guidance on how to build a business from people who were not qualified to give it.
Mm-hmm.
The 5 that were my 5, I treated as my 5 for everything versus asking the question, what purpose does this relationship serve? These are wonderful friends. They are not my mentors. And that set me on a journey to surround myself with mentors who had already built businesses that made a massive impact in the world and delivered real security for their family.
Well, everybody wants those.
Well, that's a fascinating. So some of those people, though, Jeff, might continue to be like mentors for you on being a better father or mentors for you on having a better relationship, but they were just not mentors for you from a business perspective. And you were able to realize that and kind of separate that or
yes.
Yeah.
Perfect example. One guy is I am an entrepreneur. I can take risks. I don't need all the details. I will jump out of the plane and realize I need to build the parachute and I'll build it on the way down. That's me.
Folks, we do not recommend jumping out of an airplane without the parachute and building it on the way down.
Yeah, we work with Ben. We work with Ben Kinney. We've been pushed out of the airplane.
That's true. We've been thrown out of an airplane.
So real example. So instead, knowing that that's in my DNA, when I'm talking about quitting a high-level corporate sales job to go off on my own doing who knows what, and the person I'm calling is a highly skeptical, detail-oriented attorney who doesn't have an entrepreneurial bone in his body.
Yeah.
Not the right person to call on that.
Right.
So you kind of have this realization that you want to make a transition. How do you begin to kind of seek those people out or actually make that transition?
Great question. So the first thing I realized is that a mentor can serve you best in their area of expertise, which means I had to first and foremost get a sense of clarity on what it is that I wanted. And at the time, I thought I wanted to be a commercial real estate investor. I thought that I wanted to actually syndicate deals and leverage other people's money. And so instead of just reading books, I said, well, the best way to meet people is to get in the room with them. So I started researching, what are the meetup groups? What are the events I could attend? What are the masterminds I could invest in? How do I get in the room? Because when I'm in the room, now it's an even playing field. There's no pedestal. And that's the journey that I started going down. By going down that path, I realized, you know what? I always want to invest in real estate. And if and given the chance, I would choose commercial, yet it wasn't my passion. I didn't want it to be my principal job, which then all of a sudden I'm really lost because what the heck am I going to do? And that's when it was our national sales meeting for my medical device company. I walked into the room, 1,500 chairs, and every single chair had a copy of The One Thing on it.
Really?
Then Jay walked out on stage, and for the next hour, he blew my mind. And I remember asking the questions, what in the world could I do to make Jay one of my 5? What could I possibly say to him that would make him interested in me? What could I give him that would make it worth his time? And when he finished speaking, he got a standing ovation. And when everybody sat, I was still standing. And Chad, it was one of those moments when your mind is telling you to do one thing, yet your heart's telling you to do another.
Yep.
Bob, my mind said sit, but my heart said go. Before you know it, I'm literally running down the side of the ballroom. Literally, because I'm like, well, I got to be the first one to get to Jay. And that began a conversation. And I had no idea that they had been already for well over a year looking for somebody whose one thing would be the one thing. But after some conversations, that ended up becoming my opportunity.
So,
Wow.
I mean, there's something of a seize the moment deal in there, right? Where, I mean, I don't know, you say in your heart and your brain are conflicted, but like you decided to seize that moment.
Oh yeah. I mean, a lot of people in those moments, it's uncomfortable. They would sit, but it spurred me into action. And I'll go more granular here because it matters. What I said to Jay was, Jay, my name's Geoff Woods. First and foremost, thank you. I've been at this crossroads in my life and I'm hearing you speak and I just feel a sense of direction. I feel like I have to share this with the world. Your book is so powerful. Out of everything that you're focusing on, where do you need help most right now? And he said, we're looking for more exposure for the book. And I said, well, I have this podcast called The Mentee. I'd love to feature you and help you share the message. And he said, great. So we lined up an interview. At the end of the interview, I asked him the exact same question. What are you focusing on? How can I help? And he said, we're still looking for more exposure. What he didn't know was that I already had relationships with some of the top podcasters in the world. And I started making introductions to get him booked on other shows. Didn't ask for a single thing in return. I circled back after about a month and said, how'd the interviews go? And he said, awesome. And I asked, well, what are you focusing on now? How can I help? He said, we're looking for more exposure. He had no idea that I was a writer for Entrepreneur at the time. I did all this on my side while holding down my medical device job because I figured if I started a podcast, if I started writing for Entrepreneur, it would give me a reason to reach out to people that I normally would not have a reason to reach out to. It was straight up a networking tactic to increase my 5. So I wrote the article, I published it, and then I saw him and Gary sharing all my social media posts. And so I tweeted back at Jay, which I don't tweet. And I said, what are you focusing on? How can I help? 4th time I asked without asking for a single thing in return, he said, we're looking for a CEO for a publishing company. And me being a super connector, I thought of 3 people that might actually be a fit. And so I said, I know 3 guys, not sure who's the right one. Let's have a chat so you can share the job description and I'll make the appropriate introduction. When we got on the phone, he didn't describe the 3 guys. He described me. I came from contribution, legitimately just trying to help Jay without any expectation of return 4 times before that door even opened.
Was ending up where you ended up like the long game for you or it just became that?
It was bigger than I could have thought possible.
Yeah.
And just coming from contribution, you never know what doors are going to open for you.
Correct. I knew I wanted to be the person who woke up every day owning a business that made a massive impact and delivered real security for my family. I didn't know what industry. I didn't know what that meant. I knew that was directionally correct. And I knew that if I could surround myself with the right 5, it would make getting there easier. Not clear on how exactly, but I just had a hunch. And I knew if I could be the type of person that could help others first, in the long run, good things would come back my way. And I executed relentlessly on that.
Geoff, where did that come from? Like, why did you kind of intrinsically know that if you just gave, it would come back to you? Is that like something you were raised with?
If you imagine them like dominoes, the best way to knock all the dominoes down is to line them up and whack away at the first one first. Step 1, I need to upgrade my 5. Step 2, let me just start attending events that might have a 5 in that room that I would want to be surrounded by. When I got into the room with these people, what shocked me most was that the most successful people did not show up looking to get. They showed up looking to give. It rocked me to my core because we've all been to those networking events. And I've been that guy that when you're having a conversation with somebody, you're looking over their shoulder to see if there's somebody better you can be talking to. That while they're talking, you're not actually listening because you're just wondering, are they going to help me or not? I was that guy. And then when I watched the real heavy hitters in the room, they were totally present in the conversation. You were the most important person in the room. They didn't care what your background was, and they genuinely were curious about what you were focusing on and where you needed help most.
That seems like a really like clear question that you asked Jay. Where did that question come from?
It came from early on that journey. I approached somebody who was very heavy hitter. And he told me the worst thing you can ever ask somebody is, can I take you out to coffee to pick your brain? Because he said, time is my most valuable resource. And when you're saying, can you pick my brain? You're basically saying, you're successful. I want to be successful. Will you give me your most valuable resource for free with no guarantee of return? And so I just knew I had to start. And if you ask somebody, how can I help you? What you're now doing is giving that person a job. I don't know how you can help me. I don't know what your strengths are. You don't know what my challenges are. Now you're giving me a job to even figure out what dots I need to connect versus asking a direct question. Out of everything you're focusing on right now, where do you need help most right now? That is a focusing question.
Yeah, and that's going to come back to play, that focusing question. We'll definitely get back to that. I want to go back. I love you're very good, Geoff, at laying it all out for us. And you're a master at this podcast thing, Bob. This is why I said we're getting judged on this one today. You can be sure. Geoff, go back. So you mentioned in there you had a podcast called The Mentee, and you were reaching out to people that you wanted to ask great questions to maybe end up in their 5, to put them in your 5. Some of them might have been even too big but yet you could still have that opportunity to pick their brain for a short period of time and give them something of the exposure. Think back to when you were doing that podcast. Who are some of the guests and what are some of those lessons that really stick out that you can share with our audience today that are still with you?
Sure. So the way The Mentee even came about wasn't even that sophisticated, Chad. I had gotten clear that I needed to upgrade my 5. And in a very short period of time, I had already formed relationships with some people that were huge. And it was actually the night before an event that I was telling people who had started mentoring me. And they said, dude, you should start a podcast. I said, excuse me? They said, you should start a podcast. You should just record the conversations you're already having with your existing mentors and publish those. And then it'll also allow you to have a reason to reach out to other people. So I was actually just publishing private mentor conversations. One of the guys, his name is Gene. He was the executive vice president of sales for Tony Robbins. He literally helped build Tony's company. He was the first person Tony ever let go on stage for him. Tony trained Gene personally how to speak. Gene trained me. Another guy, if you've seen the movie Jerry Maguire, the guy who was the CEO of that sports agency in real life was a mentor of mine. So, I mean, I had gotten to an interesting group of people that started to invest in me and pour into me. And I started recording those conversations.
Can you just this is so fascinating. First off, did they know they were mentoring you? Like, was this a clear conversation where you're like, hey, Gene, I'd like to be mentored by you? Or how did that develop?
Yeah. Because everybody wants to have great mentors in their life. So give everybody, how did you make that happen?
I didn't do what you just said.
Okay.
Because asking somebody to mentor you is like seeing a woman or a man from across the bar and walking up to him and going, hey, and dropping down to one knee and going, will you marry me? Right?
Awkward,
Approaching successful person, hi, will you mentor me? That's not going to fly. But Dave, who was one of those guys that I just mentioned, Dave said to me early, because every time he would get on stage, he would offer to help anybody. And sometimes there's thousands of people in the room. I'm going, dude, you're the busiest person I've ever met at this point in my life. How in the world can you make that offer? And he said, because I look for the people who have bloody knuckles. I said, what do you mean? He said, I look for the people who have been punching against their ceiling of achievement for so long that their knuckles are bloody. And I said, well, great visual, but how do you know if their knuckles are bloody? He goes, I offer to help them, but before I give them help, I actually give them a test. And he asked me, he said, when you asked if you and I could sit down, what's the first thing I asked you to do? I said, you asked me to meet you at Starbucks on a Sunday morning at 6:45 a.m. And he said, and what did you do? I said, I showed up at Starbucks at 6:35 a.m.
Yeah.
He goes, most people, I don't care if it's send me your business plan, bring me your left shoe. The majority of people won't do it. So part of this was being the type of person that could vulnerably say, just like I said to Jay, I'm in a tough spot in my life. And when I hear your message, I feel called to share it. What out of everything you're focusing on, how can I help you? For Dave, I had a very similar talk track, and this was all from a heart. It wasn't a script. I said, Dave, my name is Geoff Woods. First and foremost, thank you. I am at this crossroads in my life where I've been looking for direction, and I just heard you speaking for the first time. I feel like I have a sense of clarity, and I don't know what I could give you that would make it worth your time. I don't know how I'll ever pay it back to you, but here's what I can promise. If you're willing to invest 30 minutes in me, I promise not only will I take action, I promise I will find a way to give you an investment on a return on the investment of your time. That's what I said.
So you're just, wow. I mean, that's good stuff.
I was,
Folks, listen, because everybody's out there is always asking, how do I get someone to be my mentor? How do I find that person? Well, I think the aha I'm taking away from this, other than Geoff, you asking a great question to get in there, other than, hi, will you mentor me, please, is your knuckles better be bloody.
And
because the people who are going to say yes to you are going to be looking for the people that are already fighting and willing to get where they're going.
And just like a thriving marriage didn't start by dropping on one knee, it started by going on a series of dates. Same thing here. Sitting down with somebody who is where you want to be in the area of your life, them giving guidance, you taking the guidance, putting it into action, and then circling back to say, I put it into action. Here's what happened. Thank you. Can we sit down again? And over time, the relationship evolves into one of the mentor and the mentee.
Interesting.
Now, you say area of your life, Geoff. There's more than one area of your life. Agreed?
Absolutely. I mean, let's put it
I
this way.
think there's 7 if we were to get specific and refer actually to the one thing. I might remember something like that. Is that correct? That I'm setting you up nicely for?
Yeah, you got your spirituality, you got your physical health, you've got your personal life, you got your key relationships, your job, your business, and your finances. And
so it's not just finding one mentor in one area, and it's not finding those 5 people that magically are perfect in all of these areas. As you're talking, let's bring this all around to the one thing. Talk about that. I mean, you're having people that are in each of these circles. You're having different people you go to for different things.
Yes. And I don't have a 5 for each of the circles. And I'm not always focusing on mentorship in every circle at the same time, because you can't divide your focus that much. Yet at certain times in certain seasons of life, there's an area of your life that you feel called to invest in most. And it's in that moment that you have to ask the question, who are the people you're surrounding yourself with? Are these people who are going to hold you to a higher standard so that you become the person that you could become rather than the person you're comfortable with?
And you're not going to focus. I want to make sure everyone heard that, right? If I'm going to pull a clip, I'm going to pull that right there. You're not focused on all of these areas at once. So we're at the win, make, give, where we're talking about health, wealth, leadership, and legacy. But you're not going to necessarily be focused on all 4 of those at any given time, or the 7 areas that the one thing calls you to. You're not going to be focused on all 7 of those areas. You might not be focused on personal life right now, depending on what's going on in your world, but you might be focused on your health, or you might be focused on your business, or maybe it is your personal life.
Correct.
But it's not going to be all of the areas at one time.
Correct.
Okay. So which one are you focusing on right now in your world, if we were to get personal?
Yeah. Number 1 is relationships. I have become clear that I am imposing a ceiling over my achievement because I focus on myself first. It's what has gotten me to this point. It's a major driver behind the success that I've had so far. And what has supported me in the past is no longer serving me.
Because you've capped out, you've hit a ceiling in that regard, or
I'm at the point in my life where professionally, no one succeeds alone. You succeed through others. Ben's a master of this, right? Yeah. He's really mastered succeeding through others. He's nailed that one. I'm at that point with our business where I cannot succeed alone. We are no longer a small little company where Geoff can run through walls and make it rain. We're now a real company that has people that I have to lead. And 2, in my relationships, I am putting a ceiling over my marriage by not being the type of person who helps Amy get what she wants first. I'm putting a ceiling over the relationship with my kids by not being the type of person who helps them get what they want first. And the one thing I can do to become the type of person who helps others get what they want first is to demonstrate empathy once a day, which sounds really, really small and almost kind of silly, but I am not a naturally empathetic person. And Chad knows this. Research shows it takes on average 66 days to form a habit. At the one thing, we have this thing called a 66-day challenge, where if you just do your one thing every day for roughly 66 days, it'll become a habit. Sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter. Well, I'm feeling the longer. Today is day 211 of me consistently demonstrating empathy once a day when I naturally would not have. And it is just now starting to feel more like a habit. It's taken that much focus and discipline over a select period of time to rewire my identity.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's a super focusing question or kind of action that you're forcing yourself to take.
You're going to see a theme with me, Bob.
Yes, you are, Bob, and you're going to see why I like Geoff so much.
Well, there's some clarity. There's some clarity in these questions in this like demonstrate empathy once a day. Like, Geoff, do you spend a lot of time kind of wrestling before? Like, let's take demonstrate empathy once a day. Is there a lot of time that goes into kind of figuring out what that clarifying thing is going to be? Or did that just come to you one day and you're like, man, if I just did this, that would make me a better human. I'd be better to my wife and my kids. It kind of.
Or do you happen to ask yourself a focusing question by chance, Geoff?
Yeah. So, Bob, I'm going to challenge the way you worded it.
Okay.
I don't spend time. I invest it. When it's something that really matters, I am making an investment of my time because I am holding it accountable to a return. Before I just run and form any random habit, I want to know if I could only form one habit, what's the one habit that would make the biggest impact for me? And this is a simple exercise everyone can do. If you have a copy of The One Thing, it's page 114 of the book. It shows the 7 circles, your spirituality, because every single one of us at some point is going to wonder why we're here. Your physical health, because if you don't have your body, where are you going to live? Your personal life is your hobbies, the things you do for yourself that make you the best version of yourself. Your key relationships, husband, wife, kids, friends, mentors, colleagues, all the relationships. Your job is your role in the business. Even if you are a business owner, you have a job in the business. And every single one of us is a part of the business, even if you don't have equity. And then we have our finances. And I just asked the question, if I could only focus on one area first, not that I don't need to improve all of them, but if I could only focus on one first, what's the one that would make the biggest impact? And for me, it was relationships. Okay, well, what's the one thing I can do for my relationships? Such that by doing it, everything else would be easier or unnecessary. I need to learn to succeed through others and put others first. Okay, well, what's the one thing I can do for that? I can put others first every day. Well, what's the one thing I can do to do that? I can put myself in their shoes. What's one thing I can do to do that? I can demonstrate empathy once a day. And it started, actually, I went even smaller. What's one thing I can do to do that? My very first 66-day challenge on this was just to ask the question, how are they feeling? Once a day, when I was talking to somebody, I had to ask myself, how are they feeling? Because demonstrating empathy was actually too big of a domino to whack down. And by just asking the question, it then set me up on my second 66-day challenge with this to start actually demonstrating it.
So you were just thinking to yourself internally, how is this person feeling right now?
Uh-huh. That was the win. That was the mark of success.
What's the impact you've seen over the 200 plus days that you've been working on this now? You said you're just now starting to see it becoming a little more of a habit to you, yet what are you seeing in your relationships, Geoff, with the effort and being purposeful on this one simple domino you've been pushing at again and again?
Chad, it's almost like magic. For years, I have been making this list of the ways my wife should change, and all of a sudden she changed. Just kidding. There's only one person I can change, and that's me. And by being more empathetic to her, I am now aware of all the times when I was just direct and intense, which I have discovered is a trigger for my wife, and shut her down. So how often I shut my wife down and undermined the relationship because I didn't put myself in her shoes first and just acknowledge what she was feeling instead of trying to solve it. Changed my relationship with my kids. I mean, I've got a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, and if they're not following daddy's orders or daddy's wishes, like instead of just being drill sergeant, to get down on their level and really understand where they're at and enhance the relationship and teach them how to think at the same time. And then it spills over into my business as well.
The kids is a fascinating one, Geoff. I have a 2 and a 4-year-old, and it always ends up being that the more I can kind of get at their level and be in their head, and those conversations are better, and I'm able to kind of I don't know if persuade's the right word, but I'm able to connect with them and get and just kind of understand where they're coming from, right? As a 2 and a 4-year-old, even.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's Bob's level, so that's not a big push for you on there,
There's
Bob.
Chad. There you
All right. So Geoff, you're asking yourself that focusing question, right? That focusing question that Geoff said, folks, this is the one. Write it down. Make a note of where you are in the podcast. Come back, grab this focusing question if you don't know it. And it's, what's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? And I remember when the book came out. I remember very clearly when the book came out. I knew this was going to be one of the books that years from now is talked about, like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People or Winning, Influencing Friends, right? I knew this book was going to make it. I handed it to my daughter. She was about 12 years old at the time. And I remember giving it to her to read at that time. She was reading the books I was putting in her hands. I was bribing her to do it. I was paying her if she'd read them. And Geoff, I remember driving my daughter to camp. And in the car, I said, you were up late last night reading, because the rule was she had no electronics in her room. She was allowed to stay up as late as she wanted on reading a book. That was her consequence in the morning if she stayed up too late. I said, tell me what you remember from the book you read last night so I can guess which of the books you were reading. And she said to me, Dad, I remember that if I wake up every day and ask myself, what's the one thing I can do today such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary, that my day is going to be great. And I'm telling you, Geoff, I had to pull over. I was tearing up.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that question alone, if everybody just woke up and asked themselves that question every morning, what's the one thing I can do today for my relationship? What's the one thing I can do today for my health? Whatever that area is they're focused on, the focusing question is that powerful of a tool.
It is. Because the reason people struggle to say no is because they're not clear what they should be saying yes to. And most people, I mean, they're so overwhelmed with all these things that they got to do. And they tell themselves, if I can just get all this stuff off my plate, I can finally take the time to do that project that they know is most important. But the truth is, you're never going to get it all done. And instead of majoring in the minors, which is what most people do, they go through their day checking email, bouncing from meeting to meeting, and getting interrupted by people asking if they've got a minute. Then they look up at the end of the day thinking they were busy, but questioning if they got anything done. And that's because they spent their time all day with no expectation of a return. And if you flip it and say, if I could only do one thing today, what's the one thing that would make the biggest impact? Suddenly, all the emails, all the meeting requests, all the gotta minutes, you only get one. What are you going to do? Just whack away at that first, then move on.
Such great advice. I mean, and again, Ben, our founder, right? Ben is a master of this as well. I don't know how many times I've sent the same email to him. And today it doesn't matter to him. And today it doesn't matter to him. And today it doesn't matter. And then one day it'll be the thing where he'll finally say, okay, that's my thing today. I'm going to finally answer that message. And we have to keep at it. He knows how to say no to everything so that he can say yes to what truly matters.
Well, and another thing that he does that I respect is most people, when they plan their weeks, they open their digital calendar, see all the stuff that's scheduled, and then they start going through their inbox. And if there's requests, they start saying yes if there's an open space. And they just start filling it. And before you know it, they have days that are wall to wall, but don't actually get anything done. And I remember Ben saying that he just has his assistant. One of the models is every week they have to clear 50% of the meetings that are on his deck. They get the opportunity to reschedule, but every week he has somebody else ensure that half of his time is freed up for him to invest in what matters most.
And that explains why he keeps canceling on us, Bob.
Yeah.
We're that default that they're getting rid of on the calendar when need be.
Geoff, go back to for a second for me. Go back that focusing question, because you're really, really good at it, clearly. And we listened to you walk back that focusing question to get to demonstrate empathy once a day. Like, give me some advice. And obviously, read the book would probably be the first piece of advice, but talk a little bit about that focusing question, just just even more, because this is, to me, this is the crux of
Sure.
all of it, and feels like one of the harder pieces. If you're not used to doing this every day, that idea of like getting up and being like, okay, because some people might say, well, there's 10 things I could be doing, right? Which leads to me being busy all day and not getting anything done. How do you really like hone in on that one
Sure.
thing?
Well, let's talk about where it came from. So when Gary was building Keller Williams long time ago, every week he'd sit down with his key leaders, and every week they would bring their list of priorities. They'd review them, they'd talk about them, and Gary would say, great, go be successful. And week after week after week, his leaders would come back getting number 2 and number 3 done, but not number 1. And so he said, you know what? Let's go smaller. And so he said, if you could only do 2 things this week, what would they be? They made their list. They talked about them. Good. Go be successful. They'd come back the next week. Number 2 would be done and not number 1. And it was actually out of frustration that Gary blurted out, what's the one thing you can do? Such that by doing it, everything else would be easier or unnecessary. And when you get that clear on that one thing and you declare it, guess what they started to do?
Focus.
They're one thing. And the company exploded. So let's unpack the question. It's what's the one thing? It's not the 2 things. It's not the 3 things. It's not everything. You only get to pick one. And it's got to be one thing you can do. You saw me walk it back to what we call a lead domino. It's got to be small. People make the mistake of choosing something too big, but they can't actually knock it down. It's one thing you can do, such that by doing it, because the dominoes are lined up, everything else becomes easier or unnecessary. When you unpack the language like that, you realize how big of a question it is. And if you aim it at any area of your life and go, okay, for my finances, what's the one thing I can do? Such that by doing it, everything else would be easier or unnecessary. Most people are going to hit the wall of, I don't know. But that's, I chose very intentional language when we opened this up, where I said, I didn't have enough pain in my life to force me to ask bigger questions and search for bigger answers. I was too comfortable, so I don't know was an acceptable answer. But when the pain got elevated, that was no longer acceptable. I now had to search past the wall of I don't know and come up with an answer so that it would set me right back up to whack away at the next one. Well, what's the one thing I can do to accomplish that? Until it was a 2-inch domino that was so small that effortlessly, with the flick of a finger, it would fall.
Is that the idea of like you got to a point where there was enough pain and you weren't comfortable anymore? How does somebody who's comfortable get to that place? Like, you had this kind of confluence of events that happened, because a lot of people out there, I think, would say I'm comfortable. Like, what does that person do, Geoff?
That's a tough one, Bob. I can only speak to my own circumstance. You know, losing 40% of my income and realizing that I wasn't actually in control of my professional future was a real problem for me. Seeing our bank account almost hit 0 and looking at my newborn daughter and wondering how the heck I'm going to put food on the table, that did it.
Yeah.
But this is why who you surround yourself with matters so much. Most people surround themselves with people who accept mediocrity. And we succeed directly in relation to our willingness to tolerate excuses. And I started surrounding myself with a group of people who would no longer tolerate my excuses. They held me to a higher standard. And as a result, I rose to meet them.
That's interesting. Did you, as you seek these people out, was that kind of in the back of your head that they were going to be this accountability?
Heck no.
No.
Nobody goes willingly searching for it.
I thought they were going to be the easy button. I thought if I could just get in a relationship with these people, they've already built the business. They can tell me what it looks like. They already have the relationships. They can just connect me to those people. They can tell me what the mistakes are so I can avoid them. And all of that is true. And they also, in order to earn the right to remain in relationship with them, you've got to be willing to follow their guidance, which is not always comfortable.
Yeah.
Say that one again, Geoff.
In order to earn the right to remain in relationship with them, you have to do what they say, which is not always comfortable.
Because they're giving you advice on things they think you should be taking action on, or that you necessarily look, a lot of stuff, Geoff, right? Like, I'm assuming in some of these mentor relationships, like, you're getting advice that you're like, yeah, man, I knew I needed to do that thing. I just didn't want to do that thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, so Geoff, we've hit the focusing question. We hit the 7 areas from the one thing. Again, the advice you'd give Bob, absolute smart advice, right? Go read the book, right? For anybody out there who hasn't read the one thing, get your copy, right? Find a copy, borrow a copy, download a copy, buy a copy, whatever it is. This is one that should stay on your shelf and be pulled out every now and then to be reread. This isn't a one time and we're done. Just like if I asked people, could you name me the 7 habits of highly effective people? Most of them might remember one of them. Okay. We want you to remember the things that are in the one thing. We want you to know the thieves that are in there. We want you to know the lies that are in there. These are things that'll stick with you and help you and really, really take you to another level. Geoff, you've mentioned the focusing question. You've mentioned the 66 days to create a habit. You've mentioned the 7 areas, all very well done on all how you've worked all that in. Those out of the way, what's the one, heck, you've also talked about saying no, right? So what's the one thing you haven't mentioned that's in that book right now that's going to make a huge impact on everybody listening that they still need to hear from you?
I think I'd have to go to the first lie, Chad, which, I mean, there are all these lies that we tell ourselves that stop us from achieving extraordinary results. And when I read the book, I had read the book and I'm going, oh, I can do this. But I didn't have the mirror held up to my face for me to really look at it and understand where I was falling trapped to them. And I'll tell this story because it'll help you understand and see if you can see yourself in this story. When I was offered the role, Jay told me there were 3 things I had to do in the first 90 days or I was fired, which that's what we call a job description, by the way. The 2 to 3 things you have to do exceptionally well or you are fired. And they were cast a vision for the company that Gary and Jay would sign off on. I had to generate $100,000 out of thin air with no product before. I had to create a product and generate $100,000. And I had to prove that I could recruit talent. And those were listed in order of priority, meaning vision was most important. And the one thing I could do to prove I could cast a vision was I had to create a GPS, a 1-page business plan, and get Gary and Jay to sign off on it. So the day came where we sat down, the 3 of us, and I presented my GPS. GPS stands for goal, priority, and strategy. And just like the GPS on your phone, it's designed to get you where you want to go. So at the top of the page, there was a goal. And then there were 3 priorities listed in order of priority. We started talking about number 1. Gary and Jay asked a bunch of questions about it. I answered the questions and asked if we were good. They said, yep. So I went on and started talking about number 2. Bob, I remember about halfway through number 2, Gary went back and started asking questions about number 1. And I remember thinking, oh, he must have forgotten. So I answered the questions and asked if we were good, to which he said yes. I went back to number 2, wrapped it up, and started talking about number 3. And Gary started asking more questions about number 1. Chad, you ever seen Meet the Parents?
Yes.
You know the circle of trust?
Of course.
I was not in it. Why did Gary keep going back to number 1? Why, oh, why? I have no freaking clue. So let's do the best I can. Let's answer the questions. Are we good? Yes. I start talking about number 3 for about 10 seconds and he stops me. And he asks, Geoff, do you need to do number 3 in order to do number 2? I said, no. He asked, do you need to do number 2 in order to do number 1? I said, no. He said, do me a favor. Draw a line between number 1 and number 2, or even better, rip the page in half. And I kid you not, he waited while I ripped my business plan in half. And then he said something that really changed the way I view time. He said, don't even think about number 2 or number 3 until you've earned the right to by mastering number 1. That's when it hit me. My entire career, I had been falling trapped to the number 1 lie of productivity, the lie that everything matters equally. I prided myself if I could get to inbox 0. I prided myself on how long I could work or how many meetings I could be a part of. And what I didn't realize was I divided my focus and spent it on all the things mattered, hoping to free up time to do the things that mattered most. And here was Gary just flipping it on its head saying, dude, this is number one. Why are we even talking about anything else? Go be exceptional at that. Go.
That's powerful. It's also, I think, for a lot of people, Geoff, and I put myself in this bucket, it's really hard. A lot of us are people pleasers. I'm a people pleaser. Like, it's hard for me to say no to people, right? And this everything matters equally really gets to that idea that that being a lie gets to the idea that you have to learn how to say no.
Yeah. And again, saying no is hard because we're not clear on what we should be saying yes to.
Yeah.
Bob, how old are your kids?
2 and 4.
What's your wife's name?
Aaron.
If Aaron texted you right now and said, get off the podcast, we need to go to the ER, the kids cut themselves and they're bleeding out, what are you going to do?
I wouldn't even tell you guys why I was leaving. I'd just shut my computer. I'd be gone.
Because in that moment, you would be so clear on what you are saying yes to. How hard would it be to say no to finishing this episode?
It's simple.
Effortless.
Yeah.
The challenge is because people aren't really clear on what their priorities really are. It's hard to say no to checking email on all the time. It's hard to decline the meeting request. It's hard to ignore that customer call because you don't have a high enough sense of importance on what matters most.
I mean,
everybody listening needs to hear that message.
When you say it that way, Geoff, it sounds really obvious. You know what I'm saying? Like,
well, it's why the one thing is the surprisingly simple truth behind extraordinary results. Yeah. It's not complicated. It's not complex at all. It is surprisingly simple, and these are not.
We complicate it.
We overcomplicate things to justify our inaction.
Boy, I think I've heard Ben say that just about a dozen times in the last week alone.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. We complicated. It is that easy, that simple. Let me say simple. That simple if you'll boil it down. And what we're going to challenge everybody to do that's been listening to this episode, before you finish, pause right now, or finish the episode out. That's okay. Before you go on to something, is sit down and think about it. What is that thing? Which area of life is it you are focusing on right now? What is that one thing you could be doing? The way Geoff broke it down, step by step by step, kept asking himself to go deeper and deeper and deeper till he made it one action he could truly do. What is the priority? Because nothing is worse than going home at the end of the day and having been busy when you could have been productive. Right? Don't be busy for the sake of busy. Be productive, and the busy will fall away because you'll then have the opportunity to hire people to do the busy work if that's what needs to happen. Right? I loved letting Bob ask some powerful questions through this because Geoff, obviously I know the story. Obviously I know your story. Obviously I know the book. I had the pleasure of teaching these lessons to many, many, many people, and I still live them to this day. So it was fun to give Bob, to put him and let him feel that.
Wait a minute. Hold on. What? Chad, I
didn't set you up. No.
Are you a one thing certified trainer?
No, I was a one thing certified trainer. Yes. Oh, I had the pleasure of being named trainer of the year when I was a one thing.
I didn't realize I was like swimming in the deep end with a couple of sharks here.
We were setting you up on this one. This was all to throw you into the pool.
But we're vegetarian.
Geoff, if people out there want more, they want more than we were able to cover in this time. Tell me, where can they go? Where should they go? Other than getting the book, the one thing, where should they go? What do you have for them that they should be paying attention to?
Well, the first thing I would do, since you're already listening to a podcast, is whatever player you're using it on, I would just click the search icon and type in the one thing, the ONETHING. And we have a podcast that's in the top 5% of all podcasts in the world. Every week we have a brand new episode where we feature people who are living the principles just to help you along your journey. So that is something you can download and subscribe to immediately, which would mean the world to us. One thing I would say is, I said no one succeeds alone. And let me ask you guys, what % of your audience do you think has a significant other?
A high percent, 65%.
So here's,
yeah, I'd put it at 2 out of 3.
Here's something really interesting. When you asked, who am I said, I'm a family man with a business, not a businessman with a family. That was very intentional. Shocker. My entire career, prior to about a year and a half ago, I was a businessman with a family. I set my goals as an individual and expected my wife and children to get in line and follow. And I wondered why my wife and I were growing apart. And it's because it's a partnership, but I wasn't treating it like one. And the truth is, while we know we don't succeed alone, most people try to. Because every single person, if you're listening to this, if you've ever set goals, I'm going to ask you the question, when you set them, were the people who were vital to your success a part of the process? And if the answer is no, by the way, don't feel bad. You were never taught otherwise. But this is something, by surrounding myself with the right people, I noticed that for the last 15 years, Jay and his wife, Wendy, have done a couples goal setting retreat where they escape their normal environment and they sit down and they set their goals together. And it's not so that their goals are the same, because they're not. And it's not, it's about having insight into each other's goals so you can support each other. And this is, I genuinely believe, one of the best things that we do to date is we have a couples goal setting retreat. And in normal times, it's in person in Austin in the fall. And this year, we're doing it virtually. And it has expanded so much that it's now a goal setting retreat series where one weekend is specifically focused on couples, and the following weekend is focused on individuals and team members. Because the models are the models, but it's about how do you set them with the people who are vital to your success. And if you want to actually start living this, that is the one thing you can do, is go to theonething.com/set-my-goals. And that's with the number 1 in the URL. It's theonething.com/set-my-goals.
All right. So Geoff, I was going to ask, what are you focused on? And of course, how can we help? It sounds to me like you just told us.
I think that's the one thing that'll serve them most. Where my focus is different.
All right. Well, then what are you focused on and how can we help?
My highest focus is on the corporate side. So for the last 2+ years, we've really gotten clear on how do you help a company, whether it is a small company of 2 people to we are inside the Fortune 50 with 500,000 people. How do you help those people make the one thing part of their culture? And so that's been my focus. And all I'll say is, if you know somebody who you think is a leader in an organization that you'd think deserves to hear the one thing, email me, Geoff@theonething.com. And that's with the number 1 in the URL, Geoff@theonething.com. And
he's GEOFF.
Correct. But if you do JEFF, it'll still forward, because I thought that through.
There you go. Love that. Good thinking. So to everybody out there, you just heard, right? Geoff told us at the beginning, how did he get where he is? It was just asking that question, right? What are you focused on? How can I help? Folks, we just asked, and we asked on behalf of the Win, Make, Give audience. So if there's someone that comes to mind for you, email Geoff.
Yeah.
Send him a message and let's see if we can help him get where he's going so that the time he's given to all of us today is paid back in interest. So, Geoff, we really, really appreciate having you here. We really appreciate you sharing the messages of the one thing and, of course, the lessons you've learned and your examples that went through it. Bob, we love that you got some good coaching out of today, and I got to throw you into the deep end, as you said. We want to remind everybody out there, make sure that you're subscribed to the Win, Make, Give podcast. There is probably somebody that, not only do you want to share the One Thing podcast and information with, you want to share this episode with. So make sure, of course, you're sharing those episodes out there and sharing your messages from it. Join us in our Facebook group, facebook.com/group/WinMakeGive, where we can continue the conversation about this episode behind the scenes. And until our next opportunity to connect, remember, wash those hands. Hopefully you're wearing a mask. And as always, do good.